What is going on, everyone? Today is March 5th, 2024. My name is Anthony Santini. You are tuned into the Invest in Hockey podcast. I'm joined here with
Eric Wilson.
And today we are going to be talking about the NHL trade deadline. So something a little bit different than we're usually looking forward to. But, I mean, the day is March 8th. That's what it's going to be. It all comes down to that if you're a buyer, if you're a seller. And that's exactly what we want to assess on today's podcast. So me personally, I've been waiting all month for this day. I can't wait until Friday. I'm absolutely stoked.
I'm very stoked. So I guess 3 p.m. is that bell we're going to hear where once 3 p.m. hits, we're probably not going to hear any more trades unless there's that one last minute one, which usually doesn't happen, right? So I'm stoked as well. I can't believe it's already March, but for some reason I thought it was going to be like a late February trade deadline, and I think I've been like anticipating it. So I'm definitely ready for it.
Yeah, I'm definitely hyped for sure. Obviously, last year was a little bit underwhelming. There wasn't like a lot of moves. It felt like last year when we were watching, we were just kind of chilling all day, like watching TV. Not a lot to talk about, but I think this year is going to be the year. A lot of moves, even like those small moves that could kind of change, like those third, fourth line players. Like we saw someone like Artturi Lehkonen. We were talking about it yesterday, a player that really won't break the bank for a team, but obviously he scored those massive goals for Montreal and Avalanche during their playoff run. So maybe a team could find their Artturi Lehkonen. Obviously, it's tough to really calibrate a price with a player of that value, but, I'm definitely looking forward to it. So on today's episode, I don't know if you want to introduce it a little bit, but if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, so basically 32 teams in the NHL, pretty simple. We're going to go through all 32 teams and pretty much put them into a buyer category or a seller category. And it's really important to note that although 16 teams make the playoffs and 16 teams don't, you're going to have more buyers than you're going to have sellers just because you have, call it 22 teams that want to get into the playoffs. And unfortunately, only 16 of them will, but pretty simple. And we'll definitely go from their sense. So it's going to be an A to Z format, which means we will start with the Anaheim Ducks in a minute. But I think, the most thing I'm excited for is I really want to see some players get moved that no one has been talking about, that no one has on their trade top 10 list, right? So that's probably the most exciting thing for me. And, if you want to start with Anaheim there.
I mean, let's get her going. So to pretty much cap off with what you were talking about, you already know a trade like that's going to happen for sure. A trade totally out of left field that might change the landscape of the day and catch everyone off guard, like even the insiders. But let's start off. Anaheim, they've already started with a couple big trades to start the year, obviously trading away Jamie Drysdale, who's a big piece of their team. He obviously joined the Philadelphia Flyers, and we see a couple trades like that happen on trade deadline days where they do make a big splash. So for me, the Anaheim Ducks, I'm going to say they're a seller, obviously still in rebuild mode, and they're just kind of looking a couple years down the road. So if they can make any deals on trade deadline that could help some other teams that can come back and maybe help them in the future, I think that's where Anaheim's looking.
Yeah, 100%. Honestly, for me, it's get rid of Adam Henrique. His time's come up in Anaheim. As simple as that. And if you're not going to get rid of him, then it might be a dark horse in Trevor Zegras, which might disappoint people, but those are the only two I can really think of there.
Yeah, a lot of options in Anaheim. When you look at their team, you talk about Adam Henrique, talk about Vetrano, who's having a great year, Zegras, who's on the IR, but obviously any team would really love to have his presence, especially like the social media presence. People really forget about the ticket sales and all that stuff, but to kind of move on, and this is going to be the speed of what we're going at today, we're going to look at the Arizona Coyotes, and I am going to have them as buyers, so you might not agree with me. I'd like to hear your take, but I think the Arizona Coyotes should be buying. Should they be buying to win a Stanley Cup this year? No, I don't agree with that. I think they should be looking at some moves down the road similar to the Anaheim Ducks, but I think if you can find a player like Jake Guentzel that can, extend with your team, you get the right price. Obviously, Pittsburgh was talking about they want prospects, they don't want picks. Arizona's looked really good this year. Some of their good young guys, third liners like Matias Maccelli look great, making big impacts in the game. I think Arizona should be trading for a player like Jake Guentzel, and that might come out of left field, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Honestly, I can exactly see where you're coming from. I totally agree with buyers, 100%. They're a buyer in the sense that you need to look long term, and you need to acquire players that want to be a Coyote for 3+ years, 5+ years. And so, what's the point of you selling players that you've clearly acquired for your future if you're just going to trade for rentals, right? And if you're trading for a guy like Guentzel, who obviously would want a contract that is 3 or more years. I totally can see where you're coming from with that. But yeah, I think they can buy. I think they finally have two goalies that they can kind of look at in the future with Ingram and Vejmelka, which you couldn't say that last year when Veg was a rookie. But yeah, definitely there.
Yeah, for sure. Arizona is going to be a topic of discussion at trade deadline, and even we know they've notoriously took on salary and all kind of options like that. But a team that wants to be in contention was in contention last year and obviously fell extremely short to the Florida Panthers in the first round is the Boston Bruins. And I personally feel that, they should be buyers. I feel like that's not a hot take, but they need to be a little bit more aggressive. They might be timid from what happened last year. Obviously, buying a couple players at the deadline that didn't really work out. Obviously, I believe it was a first-round pick and more for Bertuzzi. And although he did work out in the playoffs, he didn't sign long-term. He left to go to the Leafs. So I feel like the Bruins might be a little bit timid in making a big decision like that. But at the end of the day, when you have Marchand, you have Swayman, Allmark, McAvoy, some of these great players on the team, you really have to kind of push towards that Stanley Cup.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. They're buyers, and there's not really a debate there. The question is, who are they going to buy, which I don't think either of us know, but I don't think they're going to move any goaltenders. I don't think they're going to touch their forward core, but something with that D core because of the injury to Hampus Lindholm, I think there could be something there.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And obviously we have a little bit of the bias with the Bruins over there. But let's shift over to the Buffalo Sabres, same division. And we were talking to Lucas last night, and he thinks that the Sabres can make a push for the playoffs and find a wild card spot. I kind of agree with him, but all season, the first 60 somewhat games, I haven't really seen that out of the Sabres. I haven't seen that same push. And I personally think they should be buyers at the deadline. It could help their roster and maybe a third line, second line forward, maybe trading away a prospect like Peterka or maybe even Zach Benson to kind of round out your roster a little bit more. I know that might kind of, hit the team like a brick wall, but some of these decisions are kind of what you have to do when you're not really performing. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, the only problem that I see with buying for the Sabres is there's no stars on the market other than if you want to call Guentzel a star. Like, if there was stars, you could easily trade Yuri Kulich for a star player, but there's just not that guy. So, again, I think they're buyers, but good take there.
Yeah, the Sabres are definitely an interesting team because we thought they'd be a little bit better. I kind of called them to be in the playoffs this season. Hasn't shaped out that well. A team that is on the edge of making the playoffs, which has always confused me the past couple of days, and I was talking to Murray about it the other day. Because Markstrom came out in his interview, the Calgary Flames are selling at the deadline, and I agree with them, but when you look at the standings, these guys are only, I think it was 6 points out of the playoffs with 2 games in hand. Like, maybe they don't see an opportunity to win the Stanley Cup, but look at the players they've traded away. They've traded away Lindholm. They traded away Tanev. They traded away, or Hanifin soon to come, most likely. And I don't know why they're selling, but I definitely think it's the right idea because at this point, you've already traded away all your good players.
Yeah, there's just got to be that hidden frustration, especially if you just maybe you don't trust the team, maybe you don't trust Huberdeau and Kadri and guys to contribute in the playoffs, and part of that will come from the youth who hasn't even experienced any playoff games before, like whether that's Dustin Wolf, Connor Zary, like they're big pieces of the future, and if you're gonna keep them there, you almost have to add some youth to join them in the future and not look in 2-3 years, but maybe 5+ years down the road.
Yeah, I think the word you're looking for is a rental, and that's kind of what we were talking about where the Bruins got burned last year pretty hard because they gave up a lot for a rental like Bertuzzi, and he left them. A team that, after listening to Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts, the podcast, and kind of listening to sports media, seeing what people have to say, he mentioned that the Carolina Hurricanes are not interested in a rental. So something that tells me is, these guys know they could be good for the long haul. Obviously, sources say that they made a pretty substantial offer for Elias Pettersson, so they are looking for a player that they could keep for a couple years. So could that be Guentzel? Could that be, someone that could round out their team this year and next year and 3 years down the road? For me, I'm going to say the Carolina Hurricanes are buyers, and rightfully so.
Honestly, you put it into perfect words there. They're buyers, but I don't have anything other than that to say. Like, they should be in a better spot in the Metro, just the way they're a consistent team, and yeah.
Yeah, for sure. They've been consistent for a couple years, and with the coaching and the culture they've built, it's no doubt that Carolina is going to be in the hunt this year for the Cup. A team kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum here is the Chicago Blackhawks, and although Connor Bedard is back, he's playing great, probably going to win the Calder. I don't think this team has any chance of winning the play or making the playoffs. Sorry, they're probably eliminated already, but I'm actually going to go out on a limb here and say that they should be buying. And this might come off a little bit contradictory of what the word buying at the deadline actually means, but similar to Arizona, I think that a team like Chicago should be buying some young players, that really haven't worked out, even like 24-year-old players that could kind of make a splash. We see someone like Jared McCann on Seattle where the Leafs gave up on him, and out of nowhere he was a 40-goal scorer, and I think he has 30 already. So if Chicago can find themselves in the mix, being able to pick up a player that they could see down the road, a member of the Chicago Blackhawks playing on a line with Connor Bedard, I think they should be buying.
Yeah, the only issue for me is it's like they don't have any assets to sell, but they also don't have like the youth to like buy. Like I don't think people have interest in anyone from Chicago, and like the only guy that like half their guys are hurt, right? Like Reichel's hurt, Taylor Hall's hurt, so it's almost like you can't really trade injured guys at the deadline. They're not going to make an impact. So I think for them, they're almost static, call it, but which sucks to say. But I don't mind your take there.
Even though we don't agree, I'm sure you understand where I come from, and I especially agree where you come from. But to look at Colorado, the Avalanche are easily, without a doubt, going to be buying at the deadline, and they've picked up multiple great players in the offseason. We looked at Ryan Johansson, who came to the Colorado Avalanche in the offseason, and he's been playing pretty good. I mean, for the expectations we had for him, they have to be buyers at the deadline, right?
Yeah. My hot take here is that they actually have already been buying a little more under the radar, but there's not much to do with that team. You almost don't need to buy. It's crazy to say, but with the addition of Zach Parise, who again I mention him all the time because he's probably my favorite player in the last 10 years or so, but because you added a guy that came on forward, who else are you going to add, right? You have 12 good forwards, you have 6 good defensemen, and you have your 2 goalies, who one of them just got a shutout last night. So, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes for Colorado, a team that won the Cup just a couple years ago, you got to ask yourself the question, maybe does history repeat itself? Let's look back a couple years for what worked for us, and let's try and make it happen. But
also, to just kind of say this while it's on my mind, Cale Makar does deserve the Norris Trophy. I don't care if it goes to Quinn Hughes, but Cale Makar deserves it. But it might go to Quinn Hughes. So yeah.
Topic for another day, but a topic for today to continue is the Columbus Blue Jackets, and sometimes it's a matter of, it's tough to say what you should do and what's going to happen, but I think Columbus should be selling. I don't know if they will have the firepower to do that, though, because obviously Jarmo Kekalainen was fired just a little bit over a month ago, so I don't think Columbus will be able to make a big splash like that. We've been talking about Juracek, but I can't see an interim GM making a big trade like that, especially a top, he was drafted 7th overall, I believe.
6th or something, yeah.
6th or 7th, making a massive decision like that and trading away a prospect. So Columbus should be selling for me. I don't know to the extreme how much they will be selling, but let's see if they can make a couple moves.
Yeah, sellers 100%. Your goal needs to be to let your young guys play a great last 20 games, and one of those guys who's been playing great is Cole Sillinger, now at 11 goals. A great example of someone who is in the top 9 and is just blossoming, right? That's all you can ask for.
Oh, that's all you could ask for sure, especially for a team that's a little bit disappointing. And when you compare Sillinger and Fantilli and the situation that they're in to Bedard, it's nice to see that they're individually succeeding, although the team is not, because for a young player, it could be tough for sure. And then when we look at the Dallas Stars, obviously they picked up their right shot defenseman, Chris Tanev, who weirdly enough is wearing number 3. A couple people were talking about it. He made a funny comment that was like, oh, well, 8 or 3 is half of 8. And it kind of tricks you for a second. You're like, what? But obviously he's just messing around with people. I think Dallas is going to be really good and definitely a buyer at this deadline for sure.
Yeah, they're a buyer, but I can see that trust they have in their team. They trust Ottinger, they trust Wedgwood as a backup, and they're all in. It looks great. Great to see that they're willing to make roster moves with this season happening. Yeah.
We're all in, rightfully so, and I think a team like Dallas could kind of surprise a couple people when it comes to the playoffs. A team that's really surprised us when we entered the regular season did Detroit Red Wings, and they kind of made their moves. They picked up a couple players that have really shifted their season. DeBrincat, Patrick Kane, obviously. I believe Shane Gostisbehere came in the
Yep.
offseason.
JT Compher.
So a couple players that have really made a splash. I don't know how much they want to trade, but if you're the Detroit Red Wings and Steve Yzerman, you got to be buying, right?
Yeah. Oh, honestly, you got to be buying, and I think that it's just a question of where do you buy at, like what position, because you have those guys under the radar. One being Joe Veleno, who I could see him like succeeding if they make the playoffs. I could see him being a sneaky third line guy. Maybe you fix the goaltending there, but like again, there's the availability, right? That's the whole question. If there's no goalies available, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, obviously Alex Lyon has been, what do we want to call it, like above mediocre this season? Like he's been good, not bad, not great, not amazing, not terrible. Tough to find a spot, but that's kind of the player that he is. And I've always liked Alex Lyon. Watching him last year, he fit the role pretty well playing for Florida, and he helped them in their playoff hunt at the beginning of the playoffs. Looking at a team, and we've been waiting to get to them, the Edmonton Oilers, who a team who should always be buying. As long as you have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on your team, you're always going to be a buyer, and you have to be. You have to shape this team no matter what you can do with whatever cap space, whatever prospects. You need to trade away players, you need to trade away picks, and you need McDavid to get players that he wants to play with or players want to play with him. The Oilers need to be buying at this deadline.
100%. They need to be buying, and they need to buy guys that can elevate play on their own single-handedly. Whether they're playing on the third line, whether they're playing on the fourth line, you can't just have passive players. One player like Ryan McLeod, you need a guy with him who's going to put the puck in the net, and no matter what power play he's on or whatever.
Yeah, we've seen a couple new players that joined the Oilers. Obviously, Connor Brown starting off the season extremely slow. I mean, it's tough to even say
not even
starting. Yeah, I can't even say starting off the season because we're probably in game 62 or 63, and Buddy still hasn't scored a goal. Love Connor Brown, love everything he's into, but just not loving his play this season.
Yeah.
When we look at the Florida Panthers, another great season, and they're probably going to win the President's Trophy this year. Maybe knock on wood, maybe the Bruins could contend for it, but they also have to be buying at the deadline. They lost a couple key players, like they lost Radko Gudas in the offseason, but they haven't missed a beat. They've been amazing this season. Like they have to be buying.
It's crazy. They just score goals like it's nothing, and they play night after night like it's nothing. So many names. You got Forsling under the radar. You got Lindell, who looks pretty good for maybe he's in like his call it 120th game. I don't know how many games he's played, but like guys like that just make that team almost unbeatable. And I think you just need those extra couple buying pieces at the deadline. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going to make the difference. Like you talked about with Lundell, he's played just shy of 200 games in his NHL career. So a player that's really turning into an everyday contributor to what's been a successful Florida Panthers team. But a team that started off slow, fired their coach, and is looking to really shift this season around is the LA Kings. I don't want to say they should be stagnant because people might disagree with me, but I feel like their goalie situation's okay. They got a nice little tandem of Talbot and Rittich. It hasn't really worked out the past month and a half, but to start the season, Talbot was the Vezina frontrunner and Rittich was, if we want to say above average, like we were talking about with some other players. But I feel like the LA Kings should be buying at the deadline and could be my sleeper to win the Stanley Cup.
All right. I mean, I might have to bring up the word Stanley Cup later in the pod after we get through the 32 teams because I feel like I have to, but we'll get to that later. My true opinion is I agree with what you're saying about the goalies. There's a reason they added both of them in the offseason. It's because they trust them. So you stick with the goalie tandem and you buy a defenseman or you buy a forward. Simple as that.
Yeah, very simple, and I think the exact situation that they should find themselves in. Talking about the Minnesota Wild, it's almost a coin flip. Should they be buying? Should they be selling? Me personally, I'm going to say they should be selling. I don't think Minnesota could contend for the cup, and their goalies just haven't looked great this year.
Yeah, the struggle with the word selling for me is that you're going to keep Marc-Andre Fleury. So I'm gonna agree that they're selling, but I think that they need to maybe move a young guy, and whether that's for another young guy, I just don't think you have the veterans to move. You're not going to move Zuccarello, and that's the one valuable asset, over 35 they have. So,
yeah, it was an interesting decision to pick up. Who's the defenseman they picked up that right shot earlier in the year from San Jose?
Oh, Addison, right?
Kalen Addison. So they picked up. Was it?
Oh no,
no. They traded him away actually to San Jose. It hasn't really worked out, but we came to find out that was because they do want to run the 5-forward power play, which a little bit of an interesting tactic, but you got to try different things to be good.
Exactly. Yeah, that five-man power play. Totally agree, because I remember laughing at the Leafs when they tried it that one time, but another team that did it was Minnesota. And yeah, maybe that means they need a guy on the back end who's a left shot.
Yeah, no doubt. Next up, original 6-team Montreal Canadiens that has kind of found a little bit of success this year. Maybe not a team that could find themselves in the playoffs anytime soon, but a team that has a good prospect pool. And I think, me personally, they have to be selling, but I wouldn't move any core pieces. Like, you got to think Slafkovsky, Caulfield, Suzuki are obviously pieces that won't even come up in discussions. And that's, pretty easy to say when we're going to talk about that back end, that young back end that has been good. I believe listening to Elliot Friedman talk about Jordan Harrison come up in some discussion. So players of that caliber on Montreal that maybe they could find themselves getting, a first, second round pick and maybe retaining some of that contract is where I find Montreal selling.
Yeah, they're sellers for sure. Totally agree with you there. And the one thing that hopefully this doesn't bore any hockey fans, but you need to trade Jake Allen, because there was a little bit of interest, it seemed. And no matter what you get, you need to trade him, because he's cooked in a few years. I hate to say it, but like, you got to get rid of him. You trust Sammy Montembeault in net. So why don't you just move on from Allen, right?
Yeah, they definitely trust Montembeault enough to sign him to a contract. I mean, they signed him, 2.5 months ago? So let's pick a direction we're going in, and let's try and get, a third-round pick for Jake Allen? You can't really make that much. And he'd be a perfect team for, I don't know, maybe Colorado as a backup, but even their backup's been playing pretty good too. But I'm sure you know what I mean. Having that good backup that doesn't make a lot of money is exactly what Jake Allen can provide for a team. And maybe a third, fourth round pick would not be a ridiculous ask for him. He's a little bit older, but we'll see what happens with the Montreal Canadiens. Obviously, all eyes are on them as they are one of the biggest markets in all of hockey. Shifting to Nashville, a couple weeks ago, we talked about that U2 concert, and ever since then, I believe the stat is they are 8 or 9-0. So to say it was the right decision was correct.
Yeah.
I'm going to come in and say they should be selling, because I don't think they'll be able to make a push in this year's playoffs, but I think you did not agree with me.
Well, I did not agree with you in the sense that, again, everything's gone right for them in the last 9 games. I think that team's gotten rid of players that have just it's helped so much to get rid of a guy like Matt Duchene after last year. They've made so many good decisions that to sell is just you can't, and there's a reason they are keeping Saros. It's almost like you have a good future, but you want to extend that future as much as possible while giving it a shot.
Yeah, that's actually, you just reminded me bringing up Saros, because I wanted to talk about him. He did come up on the trade bait board, but it was announced pretty much through sources, quote unquote, that Saros won't be moved unless it was obviously a mammoth. Rightfully so. He's a great goaltender, and I don't think you could throw all your eggs in one basket by tossing Askarov in your net right now.
And sorry to interrupt you there, Sense, but random thought. Would you, if you were a GM, would you move UC Saros to the Buffalo Sabres for a prospect like Yuri Kulich?
I mean, I don't think so. If you're going to tell me that if they're going to trade Saros, I think that is saying that they're all in for this year. They trust Askarov. They're going to bring him up, and that's their goalie. And is it even that bad of an idea? I mean, we saw Binnington come in Seattle, and obviously he had 1 season under his belt. Or was he a rookie? I don't know. He was young.
Well, yeah, I guess that was his rookie year. He was 25, but he played AHL before.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I mean, if you could do that and you could find yourself trading for a player that can help you win now, could that be the right move for Nashville?
Just a random thought of the day there, the one-for-one trade like that,
Yeah, I don't know. Me personally, I'll say no. I wouldn't do that, because if we're going to say that they are going to trade Saros, I think the direction would be win now. If they're not going to trade him, maybe they're going to say we're going to hold on to him for a couple years and let Askarov develop, but that's a crazy conversation coming up, especially with him. I think his contract is pending this offseason.
Who knows? Yeah.
The goalie talk never stops, and it never will. The New Jersey Devils, who it looks like, and I've said it 3 or 4 times this podcast, Elliot Friedman talked about, again, it sounds like Jacob Markstrom, quote unquote, is their goaltender of the future, which is weird to say. Talking to the scouts, it sounded like Markstrom is their guy, and it doesn't matter if it's going to be at the deadline or in the offseason or down the road. It sounds like Jacob Markstrom at one point will be a New Jersey Devil. So interesting for me to hear, but the New Jersey Devils have to be buying, no doubt. And it has to be a goaltender. First thing up, .891 goals against or save percentage for the New Jersey Devils. You cannot win a Stanley Cup with that. You just can't.
It's a tough conversation because they have a really good prospect pool as well, and just the crop that's under, call it 25 or under 23. It's like the fact that they I will agree with you first of all on them being a buyer. It's the fact that they got to hang on to Toffoli, hang on to guys, and the one guy I don't want them to move, although they're buyers, is Alexander Holtz. I just feel like he can, hop on a top line and make a splash in the playoffs, where maybe he hasn't played against top competition on the top line. But yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. With Lindy Ruff being fired, could the Devils' season change drastically and very fast? It could, hopefully so, but let's see what they do at the deadline first. Looking at the New York Islanders, and I wanted to talk about them because I can't believe I keep saying it, but Elliot Friedman talked about they want to find a forward that can score, and they found last year that in Bo Horvat, and making a big trade like that. I don't see that in their near future, but for them to say that they need a forward that can score and that will change their season, I don't know if you could say that considering with how well Barzal's played this year. So for me, I'm going to say Islanders are buyers, but I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, they need scoring, and whether they want to admit it or not, just because Barzal's production's up and so is Horvat's, obviously, since they traded for him. Like, you need more. You need a winger who's going to score. We saw it. They've had so much playoff success, technically. I remember they've gone to the Eastern Conference Finals twice in the last 5 years somehow, and I don't know how they did it when they had a lack of scoring like that, but they need it, and they got to get it from somewhere up front.
Yeah, they have to find it from somewhere, and if that's going to come from the trade deadline, we'll see. Shifting, looking at the other New York team in the Metro, the New York Rangers, and they've been great this year. They look a little bit better. I'm going to call them buyers at this year's deadline, and rightfully so. They've been good. They have a tandem in net right now that's working out, Shesty, and they just signed Jonathan Quick to a one-year deal worth $1.75, I believe. But when you find yourself in a situation like that where you have two good goaltenders night in, night out, especially with an all-star caliber goaltender like Shesty, you have to be buying at the deadline.
Yeah, you're buying, and I mean, a lot of headlines in New York this season with a couple additions, couple struggles here and there, but like they're a great team. You're buying for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. A team that it looks like we're going to disagree on, but the Ottawa Senators, and like I've said before, it's tough to define buying and selling, but we're going to do it either way. So when I'm trying to say a team is buying, especially a team of this caliber, I want to explicitly say that they should be buying players that are non-rentals, right? So players that could be on the team for 3 years. So looking at the Ottawa Senators, there's a lot of discussion about Tarasenko right now. There's a lot of discussion about Chychrun, and there's a lot of discussion about the vacancies in that. I talked about Jacob Markstrom last week, maybe being a member of the Ottawa Senators and how it could fit, but I think the Senators should be buying this deadline in the sense of looking to add to their future.
Yeah, I know that whole non-rental talk is really tough because you literally have Tarasenko sitting there that's like, in my eyes, the biggest rental you could call it almost just with the next year or so. But I don't agree with you there. I think that Ottawa's a seller. Just in the fact that it's been a disaster there, and you need to move on from some guys.
Yeah, it's been a disaster like crazy this year. The one point I do want to get off about Ottawa before we switch to Philly is if you're going to be a seller, you almost need to look at selling players that would help other teams right now, right? If we're going to define Claude Giroux in that tax bracket, why would Ottawa not trade Claude Giroux? I don't see that happening, and that's why I'm going to say they are quote-unquote buying. I think they'll sell some of their lower caliber players. But, like, that core four of, like, Norris, Kachuk, Shabbat, you know what I mean? Like, some of those big players, I don't see them moving.
Yeah.
Either way, let's look at Philly, a team that has actually over-exceeded expectations, unlike their counterpart, Ottawa Senators. Philly, although it's been a great season, I'm going to call them sellers, man. And I know you're a big Philly fan, so I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh, my goodness. I'll try and keep this short, but, like, they've exceeded expectations, and they have 20 games, and all they have to do is squeeze in the playoffs. It sucks to say it, but, like, they just got to squeeze in. It can look ugly. It might look sloppy. They had a 2-1 loss in a shootout to St. Louis last night, like something like that. Just get through it. Get your points. You don't need – it's almost like you don't need to buy or sell, but don't make any big ads because I don't think they're going to work out.
Yeah, I like what you said there. Big ad is the big word that I'm looking for because if they make a big trade, like obviously we keep saying Guentzel, right? Or we even say Hanifin. If you trade for a player like that ends up leaving like a rental, you're gonna find yourself in a very tough situation. So Philly, hey, if they could get into the playoffs and they make some noise, win a round out of nowhere, it could be a successful year considering the rebuild position
Yeah,
we're in.
yeah. Unless it's Connor McDavid, I don't think Philly needs a star player. So
And even that, I mean, I don't even know what Philly would have that you could even trade for McDavid. That would be ridiculous.
yeah, yeah.
One of the better players that has ever played in the NHL, Sidney Crosby, finds himself and the Pittsburgh Penguins in a tough situation because they thought they'd be sitting pretty, not even in a wild card spot, but at the top of their division. And it's just been the exact opposite. I'm going to call these guys a seller at the deadline, and they have to be selling. If you make a big trade, it's almost like the league's just going to laugh at you, right? Like if they trade for a big player, especially trading away Guentzel, and even the topic of Guentzel being in there, I don't love what Kyle Dubas has done with this team so far, and hopefully he could turn around because I'm a Kyle Dubas advocate.
Hey, first and foremost, I do have them in the selling category, but I don't think you can blame Dubas there. I think the team's just underperforming. I think you need to be a little more dialed. But when you have Sidney Crosby on your team, I don't think you can doubt them. So I don't have any doubt in them, but they are sellers.
Yeah, definitely a team like Edmonton, where if you have, Sidney Crosby, you're always going to be a buyer, and you have to. A team like San Jose, which bottom of the barrel, it's been tough. I can't even really call them a buyer in the sense of let's trade for a couple years down the road, but they have to be selling. You got to be selling prospects. You got to be selling top players. Just sell anything for picks or players that you think could overperform on your team. Like if there's a prospect that's underperforming, you got to get rid of them and fast.
It's such a weird topic. They don't really deserve to be talked about too much here. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that.
Damn, that's kind of like receipts. I don't know. We'll keep those receipts down the road. Looking at Seattle, obviously new team that did make a splash beating Colorado in the playoffs last year. Seattle kind of, I keep saying announced, but like I said, Elliot Friedman mentioned that Seattle will not be trading pretty much anyone this trade deadline, which makes it a little bit confusing for teams that want a player like Adam Larson or maybe even Jordan Eberle. Like there's a couple players on that team that could find success on a cup contender. But if you're Seattle, you have to be selling.
Yeah, you have so many guys where their value can just plummet this offseason. I hate to say it, but like whether it's McCann, Eberle, Larson, it's just guys that have done very well, and you have to see that success and let other teams appreciate it.
Oh, for sure. If you can't find a player having a future on your team, you have to get rid of him, especially if you see that descend in maybe value or play, whatever it might be. A team that kind of finds himself in a weird situation, mid-rebuild, do we want to call it, but not like contention. St. Louis is a little bit of a funky team because I don't see them as a top dog in this league, but I also don't see them as a bottom dog. So if we want to call them the 16th out of a 32-team league, I'm going to call them a seller because you don't really want to be average and you don't want to be making any big decisions that will jeopardize a couple years down the road for a team that won't even win the cup this year.
Yeah, my one word I'm going to say is goaltending, and it's just not there, and that's why you have to sell. Simple as that. It's not their roster, it's their goaltending, and yeah.
And a team that will have no problem with goaltending for a couple years down the road is Andrei Vasilevsky, who's been above average this season, but I'm going to call Tampa a seller because I don't think they have the firepower to really win a cup this year, but look at Kucherov, man. He's been ridiculous. So we'll see what they do, but I'm going to call them a seller.
Yeah, it's weird to say. That's another one I disagree with you there, but I think we had 3 or 4 teams we disagreed on. I don't really know. It's hard to – I don't need to say much other than I think they're a buyer. I think they could go for a cup run again.
Yeah, a cup run for sure, and obviously they've won a couple cups, but a team that stood in their way last year of winning that cup, the Toronto Maple Leafs find themselves in a situation where they're forced to buy, whether they like it or not. The fan base, everyone is forcing them to buy, and I'm sure they feel that way. The Leafs have to be buying, and it's been the same issues since they lost to Washington in the playoffs just, in 2015, 2016? You need a right shot defenseman. You need someone better to run your PP1, and you need a goaltender in net. So I don't think they're going to be trading a goalie, but the other two, I just think if they could fill that void, it's going to help them this year.
Yeah, and literally my only question, I'm going to agree they're a buyer, but I don't know how old you're looking at. Like, what age do you want to acquire, right?
I mean, maybe like 26 to 28. Obviously, the value of a player like that is a
Yeah.
little bit higher than a seasoned vet that's like 33, 34.
Yeah.
So the Leafs find them in a predicament for sure. They got to make a couple moves.
Yeah, it didn't work out with O'Reilly last year, so we'll see who it will work out with.
Exactly. So a rental like that can really burn you, especially losing that first round pick. Vancouver Canucks, not scared to trade a first-round pick when we talk about that, and they have been actively trading and adding, and they just added Elias Lindholm. They signed Elias Pettersson, so they look good. Quinn Hughes is having a Norris caliber year, and so is Demko with a Vezina caliber year. Obviously, Hellebuck in his way, but if you're the Vancouver Canucks, keep riding the train, keep buying. Let's go. Here we go. It's been a great season. Let's just enjoy it.
Yeah, keep riding the train. That's all I'll say, yeah.
Exactly. Viva Las Vegas, the team that won last year, the team that I think has a good chance of going back-to-back. They have to be buying. I don't think they're an aggressive team to buy, but just a four-line deep team that looks like they're going to pull some cap. Do we want to call it dancing around the cap with Mark Stone obviously missing the rest of the regular season? We'll hear on Eichel, but if you're the Vegas Golden Knights, you have to be buying.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the deal with Eichel is. I don't know if he's on LTI or I haven't followed that enough, but you're gonna have to buy when you have that absence of missing Riley Smith, who's not there anymore. So
exactly. The Washington Capitals, old Stanley Cup champions, I believe they won in 2018, 2019,
Yeah.
but they find themselves in a situation where they still have Ovechkin on the roster. Obviously not going to move him, but the team's starting to fall apart a little bit. We saw Backstrom go down.
Yeah.
Kuzi's back down he's down in the AHL, sorry.
Yeah.
Goaltending's been tough. The power play hasn't been good, but Ovi's playing well. I think they have to be selling at the deadline. Who they're going to sell, I don't know. Maybe if you trade a player like Dylan Strome and you get some young depth, some picks. I don't know.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's the tough question. I see a guy like Dylan Strome. He's one of the only guys that wants it day in, day out. So I don't know why you'd move him, but I also see his value to another team.
Exactly. I don't know why Washington would move him, but I'm sure teams see a lot of value. Like, look at a team like the Bruins that would definitely love Dylan Strome, a center. Like, absolutely amazing player, absolutely great kid, and he's been playing great this season. But to cap off our 32 trade deadline teams, and if they will be buying and selling, is the Winnipeg Jets, and they've started this year absolutely hot. A little slow around the All-Star game, but they are back. They are better. They play the Seattle Kraken tonight, and they look good. I think they should be buying.
Yeah, I mean, you've been a bit of a Jets advocate, not maybe a fan, but I know you follow the Jets a lot, and it's time to buy. You have so many great spots in net. Pretty good on D, great up front. So I think you maybe look at a sixth defenseman there, and that's the only thing I can really see for improvement.
Yeah, obviously adding any defense isn't good, especially if you think they can help your team. I do want to just end this podcast on one final quick segment. So I'll go first. I want you, Eric, to pick a team that will have an A+ trade deadline and then an F trade deadline. So I'm going to start off. I think the Vancouver Canucks are going to have an A+ trade deadline. They've made a couple examples of that they could trade well, make the right decisions, and it's been going well. I think personally that the Edmonton Oilers are going to have an F trade deadline, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to make the right moves. They're kind of in a cap struggle, so that's going to hold them back. And who knows what they're going to do with that first-round pick, but hopefully they could turn that into something. What do you think?
Oh, you're really putting me on the spot here. I think I need to release what I've been waiting to say for a long time. And I guess the trade deadline all will be dependent on how the playoffs go. That being said, the team with an A+ trade deadline, who will be your Stanley Cup champion, is going to be the Carolina Hurricanes. And that will come out of surprise to you. We'll hear your thoughts another day. But the team that will have the F trade deadline will be the Pittsburgh Penguins. There's a lot of pressure on them, and it just might not end well.
Bang, wow. So Eric's pick to win the Stanley Cup is the Carolina Hurricanes. That kind of came out of left field because I know you were holding on to it. I wish we had more time for you to elaborate on it. But honestly, I think this kind of brings us into next week's episode. And I know we have a little interview. It's going to be a surprise guest that will be posted. But, I mean, wow.
Yeah, I had to leave you off on that little
cliffhanger. But yeah, no, we'll definitely see you guys next week. Thanks for joining. And can't wait to talk about Eric's pick to win the Stanley Cup. He's been right 2 years in a row, by the way.